it's Rachel. Belief in the human spirit and desire to connect is the reason that I want to tell your story and mine. And I am with Olen and Danae Netterberg. They are both physicians. What is your specialties?
I'm an OBGYN and I practice in Tchad Africa, so I kind of do a lot of everything.
Ooh.
And in America, I'm an emergency physician, but we've been in Chad now for over 10 years. And like she said, we do a bit of everything.
Wow. So when you say everything, you mean that you don't stay in the typical ER and OB-GYN areas?
Right. When we first got there in 2010, we were the only doctors at a hospital that's 104 beds. So you do internal medicine and pediatrics, and she took over the role of surgeon as well.
So you do a lot of things that's out of your comfort level, but you're doing it to try and save lives. So just do the best you can.
Wow. So then when you are the only two physicians for an entire hospital, does anybody teach you surgery? You know, you're physicians, so you're board certified, but does anybody help you with these other areas, that pediatrics and internal medicine, that you may not specialize in?
For sure. It was a slow learning process. Like our first year, we had a nurse that lived there, a local nurse who did general surgery. So I learned from him. And then my father moved over there who does general surgery. He's a family practice doctor, but so pretty much before I spent time alone doing surgery, I spent like 5 years with him learning, and Olen is too.
But we were there for over a year before he came. It was a lot of reading textbooks. The first 6 months we were there, we read so much trying to figure out tropical medicine that we hadn't done in America. Or there were actually some times where I would have the surgery textbook open in the operating room.
Yeah, I remember my very first, I had done many bowel resections before. So if your bowel dies, your small intestine, you need to take it out or you'll die. So I remember I had done that before with my father, but then I was by myself this one time and I had Olen get the book out and I was like, can you read? What is exactly do I need to do? And so we were, trying to remember based on the book. The patient did fine, but it was an emergency situation. You're just trying to do the best for the patient. But it was really scary.
And the fact of the matter is you're in a health district of 200,000 people, and there's no other doctor and there's nobody to refer them to. You can't box them up and send the patient to another hospital down the road because they also are not trained. So you do the best because the patients are going to die if you don't. And we've been fortunate that Danae is naturally talented at surgery. So we've had some very good outcomes.
Wow.
But we definitely learn as we go. And since we've been there long enough, we've seen most everything. So
Most everything. And when you see these life and death scenarios, and you're the only doctors in this hospital, what are the conditions in the hospital? Medicines, what do you have available to you?
Not a lot.
Yeah, that's really hard to explain to an American or somebody that's not from the country where we practice in, because it is so different. And we don't often realize that it's so different because we've been there for 10 years until somebody comes over that's a visitor. And then they're taking pictures of everything. And they're like, wow, you have a chicken in your pre-op room. And we're like, oh, I didn't even notice. What? There's a chicken. And it's just very different and very, it's
just very underdeveloped. Chad is not like most places in Africa. And one of the reasons why we decided to go there was because we felt there was such a huge need. We looked at the statistics of Chad when we had first visited and were thinking about moving there. And at one point or another, it had the worst maternal mortality rate, the worst neonatal mortality rate, the worst under 5 years old mortality rate. It was named the most corrupt country in the world, the worst country in the world to do business in, the worst country in the world for tourism, the worst country in the world for a child to fall ill.
It sounds like a lot of bads, but I guess we're just weird and we're different. So we wanted to go where we were needed, because why go to a first world country when we could practice in America? So we wanted to go to one of the worst places, I guess.
And it was also named, in addition to having like the shortest lifespan, the worst place in the world to be a woman. And having an obstetrician for a wife, we figured that was an ideal place. When we first went there, the government was proud that they had gotten the number down so that only 30% of cesarean sections to deliver a baby, those women died. 30% of the women having a C-section died. And that was an improvement from where it had been before. Now it's even better than that. But when we first came, almost 2% of pregnancies resulted in the death of the mother. So for every 50 women who got pregnant, one would die because of that pregnancy. 1 in 11 Chadian women, 9% of Chadian women died in childbirth. It was just really sobering numbers. And our hospital is very rural. We're 25 miles from the nearest pavement. In our whole region of 1 million people, there is no electrical grid. There is no public running water. Our town has more ox carts than it has cars. It's extremely rural. And so, you know, things like bottled oxygen, we're not going to have that. Things, the very simple things that you're used to, we take for granted. I'm not an anesthesiologist, but I do the anesthesia. We do the radiology. We're cardiologists and nephrologists, and we're all the rest because we have to be, and there's no other option.
A lot of doctors in America get so used to ordering all of these tests, or you go to the emergency room, you get a CAT scan, or, you know, you order all of its blood tests. And where we are, there's been times when we don't even have what's called a hemoglobin. It tells how anemic you are. So there was like a 1 or 2 month period where I'll have somebody come in hemorrhaging. I don't really know how anemic they are, but you just look at their eyes and you can, if it's white and you're on your conjunctiva, then you can tell, well, they need transfused. So you really go by, it's just very different. You go by a lot more on their physical exam than based on a bunch of blood tests.
Yeah, you know, we don't have a CAT scanner. We've been there for 11 years. We just got an X-ray about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago. It's just very, very underdeveloped, but we're getting there.
Yeah, and if you're not medical, you know, it might be interesting to listen to the differences, which we'll try and explain it, you know, in non-medical terms, but it's just very simple. And it's a lot of times people come in with emergencies, they can't go anywhere else, and we're dealing with life and death situations. If we don't do it, nobody will. And so it's very rewarding in a sense.
Yeah. So you say that it's rewarding, and you picked Chad because it's challenging, but was there a case that just really stumped you or got under your skin? I mean, I know you like the challenge, but what was something that threw you?
A lot the first 6 months.
Yeah. Every single day we have stuff that every week there's something I have never seen before. And I'm like, oh, I've never seen that before. Okay, let's.
But the cases that get under the skin are the cases that you know that you could treat in America and that we can't treat in Chad, just lack of resources. You know, we don't have an intensive care unit to admit people to. So the people that we would intubate and put up in an ICU, we don't have that ability in Chad. Or you know, diabetic ketoacidosis is a severe challenge in a place where it's hard to get a blood sugar, hard to find insulin. We've had diabetics die because the entire country ran out of insulin. So now we import our own insulin. Those are the big frustrations. The failures of systems and infrastructure, supply chains. Those are things that get under our skin more than being stumped. You know, as a physician, when you get stumped, it's frustrating, but you can admit that you're stumped and you can kind of go on and you have to, in Chad, we kind of have to be satisfied with, well, we are doing the very best that we can. We're trying to learn from every gap in infrastructure and supply chain. How can we become more self-sufficient and self-reliant? So we keep trying to learn from these situations, but that's more frustrating than anything else.
We could tell you a lot of really sad stories, but because we see probably more death than most people in the medical field in their lifetimes, but we try to be more optimistic and tell the good stories. But I just a few months ago, before we came back on vacation, you know, you still get these stories that just get to your heart. And I delivered this little baby by vacuum extraction. So the mom had been in labor a long time out in the village, and she finally came in. I delivered her by vacuum, and the baby came out not breathing, and I was for sure it was going to die because I've seen so much death in America, you can't imagine that babies die if they're in labor and they're alive, because they go to the ICU, the NICU, the neonatal ICU. But here we don't have that. We don't even have a pediatrician to come resuscitate the baby. So I'm the one doing it. And this baby was lifeless. It was not breathing. And I was like, oh, it's going to die. And I kind of accepted it, but said a little prayer. I believe in a higher power. And then it like took a little breath, and it still gets me every time, because you just know in your head, well, this one's going to die. But then sometimes you don't know. And it was really touching. I actually could not believe that this little child lived, and I breathed for it like 30 minutes. And eventually the little kid, it didn't ever cry. And then the next day I was doing rounds. It was a little baby girl. And then the next day I was doing rounds, and they told me that it was breastfeeding and that it had cried. And I was like, what? The baby cried? So I pinched it. And then I got all teary-eyed because I couldn't believe that this little baby that I assumed was going to die had lived. So, I mean, we just, even though we've been there 10 years and we see a lot of death, we just, every time we see new stories and new life, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm really glad that I was here to witness that. So just kind of makes you stay there.
And it's the cases that like that give you the goosebumps and kind of keep you going. You know, in Chad, 12.5% of childbirth, the baby dies at birth. 1 in 8. So if 8 kids are born, 1 of those 8 die at birth. So you get used to it, but you still have cases like this. You still try, because you have a few of these babies that live that you're sure are going to die like all the others, but they live. So then you have to try it on all of them. And I shouldn't say have to, but then you do try it on all of them, because a few of them are going to make it. But you know, 12.5% die at birth. And of those that survive, 21% still die before the age of 5. You've got malnutrition, you have malaria, you know, there's lots of reasons why they die, but you see the miracles. So we also, the month before we came back to America for vacation, we have new doctors now with us. We've recruited some other doctors. And one of our new surgeons, he's got a heart of gold, and he especially loves kids. In fact, he's about to start a pediatric surgery fellowship. He's coming back to America for a 2-year training specialty. But we had a kid come in. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the kid had fallen out of a mango tree. And every year in mango season, the kids go up in the mango trees to find mangoes. And mango wood, it doesn't bend, it doesn't creak and crack, it just snaps and drops. So every year we have kids come in with broken bones, a few deaths every year from kids falling out of mango trees. This kid fell out of a mango tree, and Andrew, who normally wants to try everything for kids, he was ready to give up on this kid, which is very not normal for Andrew. And I said, well, you know, let's go give it a shot. So we went into the operating room, and we spent, I don't know how many hours, 3 or 4 hours, kind of cutting back this kid's scalp, peeling it back, finding where a piece of skull had broken and slipped under another piece of skull, getting it back out, releasing the bleeding that was pushing on the brain. And I mean, the kid was unconscious through the whole thing. The kid was just knocked out of it. So there was good reason to believe he was going to die. And over the next several days, he didn't really, you followed him more for the next several days.
I rounded on it, because I round on surgery. And I mean, they talk about people in an unconscious state, and he was definitely, we had to put a feeding tube in him because he was going to die without nutrition. So we put a feeding tube in him, and then eventually we turned it into a more long-term plan, because he was still living, and we were like, how is this even possible? We don't even have an ICU here. We're just providing him nutrition and antibiotics. And anyways, I thought for sure that the little boy was going to die. And then we eventually put what's called a G tube in, so a feeding tube that goes into your stomach for more long-term plan, which we never do in Chad because things don't usually last that long. Yeah. Anyways, to make a long story short, after he was discharged, a few weeks later, he came in actually walking.
And you could talk to him, and he could respond to you.
I mean, he's not 100% yet, but he keeps getting better. And sometimes we try and make judgments as physicians, because, you know, we're trying to make life and death decisions, and then we don't always know the outcome. So it's just really cool to see some of these stories.
But, you know, it depends on if you believe in coincidence or providence. But we had a kid die. We had a really rough case one morning. It was a Sunday morning. where a kid came to the hospital and died on us, a young kid. And the same surgeon, Andrew, he had poured everything into this kid. He worked hard on this kid, and the kid died anyways. And so Andrew was pretty broken up about it. And he went out to go do his rounds, to go visit all of his surgical patients. And that was when that kid came back in, the kid who was supposed to be dead, who was, you know, he had been getting fed through this tube in his stomach. Well, now he was eating by his mouth. He was responding to people talking to him. He was weak on one side of his body, but he was still able to get up and walk and move around and grab stuff. And so I saw this kid back in the hospital. I went and I grabbed Andrew and I brought him back to see the kid. And as soon as Andrew saw him, he just broke down like weeping. It was pretty awesome to have that kid come back like the exact day that Andrew really needed that encouragement.
We have so many of these stories too. So, I mean, just, it's incredible to see when you think, because we see so much death, but when you think, well, that's just going to happen too, and then it doesn't, you're just like, oh.
Yeah, so you still try. You're sure somebody's going to die, but you still try. Because every once in a while, you're wrong, and they're going to make it.
Yeah. And I love that story because you say that when Andrew, the surgeon, when he needed it, he just needed a little bit of belief and hope. That kid walked in, supposed to die. You know, all the stats, you know, you look at him. And so I think that sometimes there's meaning, you know, when you're broken. And so would you say that that is neurosurgery, something with a scalp, or, you know, because I said,
yeah.
So is that neurosurgery, what you just did?
Yeah, the extent of our neurosurgery is that it's, you know, if somebody gets a broken skull that goes under another piece, to pull it back out, or to maybe drill a hole in their brain to let out some blood if there's bleeding, that's about the extent of our neurosurgery. We
had the same thing happen. I think it was the year before, where it was just you and I there, and we had a kid fall out of a mango tree, and I was like, no way, we are not touching him, because I had never done that before. And Olen was like, come on, dear, I'll be in there with you. And
she refused. So I said, there's a kid you should try. And she refused. She's like, if you want to do it, go do it yourself. And I was like, fine, I'll do it. But you know that you're the better surgeon. So you're a better surgeon. But if you want me to do it, I'll go do it. So I went up.
He always forces me to do things.
She has a heart that cannot, you know, she's the best surgeon in town. So if she's the one that's going to be the best chance for somebody's survival, she can't stay home. She has to come up and do it. So I'm in the operating room getting ready, and sure enough, she shows up. And then I don't think I even scrubbed. I think I just did the anesthesia. And I told her, you know, do that, and she's got amazing hands. So
I had never pried back a skull before, so it was rather interesting. But you just try and stay sterile and try and release the blood. So. And
actually, the kid that I did with Andrew, or the kid, I also did anesthesia only, and Andrew actually did all the surgery for that kid. But I had my phone out as we were kind of 2/3 of the way done with the surgery, and I FaceTimed our neurosurgery friend in Germany to show him what we were doing. And he was like, well, if you're gonna do it, this is the best way to do it. So keep cutting, keep dissecting, keep exposing, keep pulling back scalp. This is where it's gonna be spongy. This is where the bleeding is most likely to be. But he was like, I don't know why you guys are doing this. Do you want the kid to die today, or do you want him to die in 3 weeks? You're fools for even trying it.
But it does make it much more interesting or easier now that we can have better internet. Like our first 9 years, we did not have the capability to FaceTime. So we carried a blog and we wrote stories more. And now that we can communicate easier with people, our internet is better. It's easier to write people. We can write other specialists and they can tell us what to do. Actually, while we're gone on vacation right now, Andrew, who's the general surgeon, he's doing all of the OB care. And so I'm in communication with him several times a day as to what he should be doing exactly. And, you know, he's not that comfortable doing vaginal exams on an OB patient that's delivering and all this stuff. So, it's not the ideal care, but unfortunately, there's not the volunteers or the people needed to go over there and help. So you have to do the best you can.
Yeah, he's there by himself right now, running the whole hospital. And actually, just this morning, I got the statistics from our hospital, and last month we had way more patients than we did a year ago. So he's working hard. Yeah,
right before we left, we had a patient. So there's two other physicians there that are working in the hospital, and they were doing a C-section for a previa, and I was rounding in the hospital, and they were doing it to get more experience with OB while I could maybe back them up. And the patient ended up hemorrhaging, and I came in and helped them do an emergency hysterectomy. She had something called previa, and it's where your placenta is covering where the baby should deliver vaginally. And she ended up bleeding a lot, and I went in and helped them. And she went into something called DIC, which is when your blood factors, your coagulation factors don't work. So even if you put stitches in, they're just still going to bleed. So her muscle was bleeding, everything was bleeding. And so I ended up packing her with lap pads and then taking her back the next day, and she was still bleeding. And so I packed her again and took her back 2 days later. So that state was challenging for me because most of our friends, a few of our friends know, but most of our friends don't know I'm actually pregnant right now. So yay. And, but at the time, I know a lot of the risks because I've dealt with so many bad situations over there. We have at least 15 moms a year that die and so many babies. So it's very challenging. And so I was taking care of this woman, and then I was like, okay, what if this is me? So I had to mentally I'm like, we have to get out of here. And that leads to another story, because at the time we were having issues with our country, but this lady that was actively dying in front of me, and I was the one taking care of her, I was the backup. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm the backup, then who's the backup for me? If I have an emergency hemorrhage or something. So we've had that happen a few times, and with our kids and different things, but when it's yourself, it's a little more challenging.
But Danae was about 7 months pregnant, and we won't go into it, but she's having a non-typical pregnancy where she's going to need to have a C-section. So the plan was to come back to America to have a C-section, to have a baby. But at about 7 months pregnant, we started having a coup in Chad. We had elections in the country, and the day we had elections, we had rebels coming in from the north. And
it's all exciting because most people are like, oh, wow, you have a coup, you should stay put. And while I know, yes, most of our friends didn't know we were pregnant because we were just kind of keeping it a secret just to be funny, because we have 4 kids already. And so it's interesting, like we could stay put because we felt like we were safe at our hospital, but I wanted out of the country.
Well, and the surrounding countries are Libya and Sudan and Central African Republic and Nigeria, the part of Nigeria where Boko Haram is doing a lot of terrorism, and Nigeria. So leaving the country to a different country wasn't really a safer option. But we have this coup going on, and the president of Chad flies up to the north to go support the troops and fight with them. And while he's up there, he gets shot and dies. And, people find out about this a couple days later, that he dies from a gunshot wound. And so now there's no president, and the president is supposed to now become, or the head of Parliament, of Congress, is now supposed to become the president. But instead, the military decides that they are going to suspend the Constitution, dissolve the government, essentially have a military transitional committee, and the president's son, who's a big military guy, is now the new president of this transitional government. Even though he's 37, the Constitution says you have to be 40 to be president. It's a hot, amazing mess. And in the midst of this, they shut down the airport. So the rebels are coming for the capital, and that's where the only airport in the country is. So we're not excited to go traveling to the capital to go face the rebels and try to get to the airport. Plus the airport is shut down anyways. Plus it's COVID. So there's like a curfew, and then, a coup d'etat curfew is even earlier in the day. And there's all these horrible things going on at once at the same time that we're trying to get out of the country.
So we were pretty much stuck, which we felt safe at our hospital, but I wanted to get out because I wanted to not deliver in Chad because I see so much death every single day. So it was a little dramatic, and we were kind of keeping it to ourselves, but anyways, now
they eventually opened up the country. They let people travel again, and the rebels kind of got pushed back up to the north. So we were able to get to the capital and get out, but we were looking for creative ways. I had an acquaintance who was actually on the American military base in the capital. And they were like, well, if you get her here, you guys can't go, but she can get on a military jet to Niger. And then from Niger, she can try to get a commercial flight back to America.
And Olen's like, dear, okay, you can go by yourself and the kids and I will stay here. And I'm like, I'm not leaving the kids.
But we eventually all made it back together.
Yep.
Did you have a, go bag and your passports and you're just like, well, whenever there's an opening,
we did.
You did. You literally prepped for like the second we can go, we get out.
We thought, we didn't know, because in 2009 or 2008, they had the same kind of situation where the rebels came into the capital. And so we knew, anytime there's instability, you could have a war breakout. Well, even though we felt safe, we had a list on our little whiteboard in our house where, okay, passports, malaria medicine, money, food. I think that was about it. That was going to be in our go bag. But our plan was we wouldn't be able to go to the capital to leave on an airplane. Our plan was that we were going to have to go through Cameroon by private vehicle. And our vehicles weren't really working that well. So it was a little dramatic, but.
And
we made it out.
4 kids and you're having your new baby. So congratulations. And
thank you.
Beautiful family, because they are just gorgeous, your kids. And how do they like, being in Chad? And do they help you? Do they take an interest in medicine? I mean, I know they're little, but Chad's a little different.
So we moved to Chad when we only had 1 kid, and he was 1 year old. So Chad is kind of all they know. They like it because they're homeschooled, so they're free range children. They're semi-feral. They kind of run around outside all day long, and they turn on the hose and make mud out of the dirt and build cities out of mud and play with sticks. And
we were very fortunate because for 6 years, my dad and my dad's family practiced and my mom stayed home and watched the kids. They lived with us. And then a few years ago, they left. And so now we're stuck with, okay, what do we do with the kids? So Olen is technically supposed to be staying home with them, but I call him up to the hospital all the time. So now they're a little bit older. It's not as big of a deal, but it is challenging. We're trying to put them first and trying to figure out parenting, and
but I think
decided just keep having kids because,
I think they have a great childhood. I mean, we work very, very, very hard. I mean, they get to have such a different worldview compared to other kids around them. They've seen so much of the world. They've seen what poverty is. They've seen what hunger is. They speak French. They've had a pretty wonderful childhood.
They like to play in the dirt, and we're not really into electronics much. So I think they're getting a good childhood raising, except for, I mean, there are things that we can talk about at some point where it makes it difficult for our children because of health issues, mainly malaria and other tropical diseases that we don't face in America. But for the most part, I mean, I think it's a great upbringing because they play outside in the dirt and they play with sticks and they're very creative.
How many kids do you know that you can actually see the worms crawling underneath their skin?
Gross. It's true. One time we had a worm. A few times in Addison. We just give them worm medicine every several months.
Lyle and Zane, and at least 3 of our 4 kids have had these worms. But.
Yeah, it's exciting.
I'm actually getting chills.
Are you starting to itch?
Yeah, oh my goodness, that's so interesting. And, are your kids fluent in French? And then for you, how is that with the language, with operating and stuff? Like, have you gotten good at, body language?
Olen's better at language than I am. But we both went to Cologne. It's a place in France where we learned French. We were only there for 3 months. And I'm a little more shy, and he doesn't care what people think of him. So he'll just speak whatever. And so he got really good quickly. And I'm like before I went to Chad, I didn't even know how to say any of the women terms in French because I didn't say them at the cafeteria table where we were supposed to be practicing. So I had to learn that in Chad, and I get really good at actions. So a lot of women come in and they don't even speak French anyways. So I'm trying to make my actions
when your gynecologist when your gynecologist is doing charades.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Also, I do group rounds.
about women's issues? So they don't speak French, and you know some French, and you're doing the body language and the mimes, but are they also embarrassed? Are women's issues a sensitive thing?
It's hard to say that. I think that if you get women by themselves, they'll definitely talk about it. Women, I mean, I'm a bit of a feminist, and women don't have a lot of rights. It's a very difficult place to be a woman in Chad. Polygamy is rampant.
Violence
toward women, which in any country it can be, but it's kind of more accepted there. It's just now getting to be where if you talk about it, it's like, oh, you kind of know you're not supposed to, but still, if you hit a woman, it's not, you're not going to go and get in trouble, really. There's no one to really report it to. So it's really frustrating to me. So I've had to devise other methods to help get on the family side. So we do group rounds in the morning. And if a woman has come in and the man is not helping her, I have to try and figure out how to get on his side, because calling him out is not necessarily going to get me to my end point of helping the woman what I want. It's not always easy, because it's just not always easy, because a woman doesn't have a lot of rights.
Well, but women also don't believe in their own rights. So the World Health Organization carries out questionnaires in most countries of the world and different regions of those countries. And Chad is usually one of the last countries in terms of women understanding their rights. So the region we are in, the Tangile region, when they come and ask women in our region what their rights are, 90% of women in our region believe that it is okay for their husband to beat them for reasons such as burning the food, or going out with their friends, or not raising the children, or various things. They 90% of the women, not the men, 90% of the women feel like that it's acceptable for their husband to beat them for these reasons. So when that's what you're dealing with, those kinds of statistics and that sort of patient population that believes it's acceptable, it makes it a challenge, especially when the obstetrician is a feminist rounding there. Wanting to liberate all of the women at once is a little challenging.
But I've learned different ways of trying to get on their side. And it's not just the women too, it's babies. So a baby will be born, it has an infection. It will get better if it gets several days of IV antibiotics. It will die if it doesn't. And it costs like $2 to pay for this medicine. And a lot of times the husbands will come in. And so you can't just talk to the patient. We don't have insurance there. Nobody has insurance in the country. So they might have the money, but they're choosing, oh, well, this child is probably going to die anyway. So they might be choosing to just not pay for it. So it's like playing a game of chicken sometimes, like, should I pay for this? Because I can and I will. But if you pay for it all the time, then nobody's ever going to pay for anything. So it's kind of like playing a game of chicken. And so it's not just the women, it's the babies too. So I'll try and get the man on my side. And sometimes I'll get really mad and call him out. Or sometimes I'll try and be nicer and get him on my side. And it's for the life of the baby. It's not for me. It's trying to help this baby live. So practicing medicine in this kind of an environment is very challenging and it's not just what you don't have, it's the emotional aspect of getting involved and really feeling like sometimes you try more for this kid than they are trying, but it's not their fault. It's cultural, and sometimes they accept the death of children before you do. And that's because they've seen death way more than we have.
Yeah, well, and the fatalistic attitude of children dying is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because, the mother-in-law is always there with the woman and the newborn and saying, well, I know how to raise my kids because I had 10 babies and 4 of them lived. So I know how those 4 lived. So what I did for those 4, this woman should do too. And trying to convince them, no, actually, of your 10 babies, all of them could have lived if we would have given medicines, if we would have breastfed, if we would have done all these things. But they don't, we don't always see eye to eye on that rationale of getting from point A to point B. So then when they don't believe that it's worthwhile, my baby's never got any of that medicine, so that this baby doesn't need it. Well, then, so many of your babies died. This baby could live. So Danae is not allowed to round on pediatrics anymore, because every time she rounds on pediatrics, she just pays for all the kids' medicines. And
It's too hard sometimes to tell, like, are they going to pay for it? So I'll be like, okay, if they don't pay by noon for this medicine for the next day, that's going to save this child's life, please let me know. And, you know, we have donors that give us money that help pay for this medicine. It's not a big deal. It's just that when you're trying to also run a hospital financially, you can't pay for everybody's medicine. So it's really challenging,
right,
emotionally.
Our income doesn't come from the hospital, but every other expense for the hospital comes from patients paying their bills. We don't have people giving money to the hospital so that we can run a hospital for free. So, you know, our nurses' salaries and buying medicines and buying cleaning supplies and all those things, that has to come from patients paying their bills or from convincing Danae to pay their bills.
Not hard.
Yes.
One of the interesting programs we have now, and I didn't realize it when I first went there as an OBGYN, we don't see this problem in America, but I started noticing that people were developing vesicovaginal fistulas. And so I had women come over and they'd be leaking urine constantly. And this is a direct complication from abnormal childbirth. So there's this big push in America right now to have home births. And while everybody thinks, oh, I did a great job and I did a home birth, it can be fine because most babies can deliver without a doctor or without somebody assisting you until it's not fine. And in America, we have the privilege of being able to call an ambulance and you can be at the hospital within 10 minutes. In Tchad, 90-something% of women have home births, but they're in a little mud hut. And if it's in rainy season, it could take 12 hours to get to the hospital because the roads are bad. They have to figure out where to call the motorcycle, get the motorcycle, put the woman, if she's seizing in a coma because she has a disease called eclampsia, that because they have terrible prenatal care, they don't know their blood pressures half the time. They'll put the woman in between the driver and somebody behind them, and she's in a coma. And then half the time their legs get burnt on the motorcycle. And it's just, they don't have the option of calling an ambulance and being at the hospital in 10 minutes.
Well, and most of them who are delivering at home, they're delivering with the mother-in-law delivering their baby. They might have a traditional birth attendant who is most likely to be illiterate, but I mean, they're not with any sort of trained medical professional at home, not like a home birth in America might be with a midwife.
So needless to say, if they have a hemorrhage, they die out in the village because they can't make it to the hospital. And if their baby gets blocked, so in the birth passageway or the vagina, the baby will get stuck there. It'll kill the tissue between the bladder, which is right on top of the vagina, and the vagina. And then that tissue, after a few weeks after birth, will slough off, and then a hole develops between the bladder and the vagina. And then urine just constantly leaks out, and that's called a vesicovaginal fistula. And so it's not uncommon in Tchad, and it is rare in America. It just doesn't happen because we have good care in first world countries. So I had the privilege of starting to repair these women. So you have to wait a couple of months and then you can do a vaginal surgery and repair this. And for a woman who has smelled like urine, many of these women have been having this problem for 20 plus years. I have women that come in even now who have been leaking and smelling like urine, and their husbands have left them and they've been in a little hut, like just getting malnourished. No one's helping them. And
their parents and their families won't even take care of them.
They're ostracized from their family. And for instance, I had this one woman named Falmata who her first baby was born. And a lot of times your first babies, it's prolonged labor, you're at home, your first baby will die. So her first baby had died. Her second one is alive. He's a little boy. And then her third pregnancy, she labored a long time at home and her uterus actually ruptured. So that means it basically tore in two, and then the baby was floating in the abdomen dead. And because of her prolonged labor, she developed a vesicovaginal fistula. And she came to our hospital and she was repaired and didn't die from her ruptured uterus, but she developed a vesicovaginal fistula. Anyways, later, her husband left her. She's young, she's in her early 20s, and she has had 3 terrible pregnancies, and now she can't have any more children. But her husband left her, so she's alone with this little boy that she's raising. And because of her story, she stayed around and helped after her fistula was repaired. She stayed around and now she works for our hospital. So it's kind of very exciting because she can help other women with the same problem. And they come in and you can tell their face looks down and they feel like, oh, everybody hates me. And then, you know, once you can repair them, and she gave them, she kind of gave them hope because she would tell her story too. And she still works there. She works for our malnutrition program. But it's kind of fun when you can connect somebody who's been healed with the people who are not yet at that state, because it gives them hope. And we like working with her.
So when you are able to do a repair that actually changes a woman's life, how she feels, and also the physical peace, and you can see this.
Yeah, it's very rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, they go from nobody wanting to be around them because they smell like urine to nobody knows that they're any different.
Yeah, wow. So if that is your specialty, you know, you do everything, but you're known for this, Olen, is there something you're known for? You know, I know that Danae is the surgeon, but what is there something that's kind of like your specialty?
Not really. I end up doing most of the administration at the hospital, which I absolutely loathe, but let's not talk about that.
He does. So I take care of the women and the surgical abdomens. And then anytime there's any medical, really complicated medical patient or pediatric patient or anesthesia, he takes, so when we split it up, we always said he takes the men, I take the women.
Fair enough.
Or he'll take the even on like my OB patients who are complicated. Sometimes during pregnancy, you can develop what's called preeclampsia, and then you get pulmonary edema or water on your lungs. And I'll have these complicated patients that will present very late. And so I'll call him up and I'll be like, dear, can you, you know, we have probably a weird relationship compared to people in America because we work together. And
terrible idea.
Sometimes I'm like, I don't agree with that. Or he's like, but I want his opinion because he's better with the complicated medical patients. So
theoretically, I'm my wife's boss, and that's never a good situation.
Anyways, we could tell you more stories, but I don't know how many you want.
I guess when mostly I'm home with the kids, or I'm doing administration for the last few years. But I suppose if the other doctors don't really have an idea, they'll call me and I'll go see the patient and probably don't have any better idea, but I'll try.
And also ortho, you do, like, I don't really like ortho. I mean, I can operate and I'll be like, he helps me set the ortho patients. So broken bones. It's not really my thing. I don't really like broken bones.
I do the sick patients and the odds and ends that nobody else wants to. If there's just a lot of patients to see, I'll go up and
And I don't know if you know about ER physicians. They're very efficient. So in between our operating room, we have this tiny little operating room, which we have done in many years, 1,400 cases a year in this little operating room. So we're constantly just like getting patients in, operating, getting them out, trying to make it flow. And in between that, we're seeing consults for patients. The nurses see our intake patients, and then they refer the complicated ones to us. And so we're supposed to be seeing them in between our patients. And with this pregnancy anyways, I'm like, I need to stay off my feet. So I'll call Olen up. I'll be like, are you with the kids? I'm like, there's like 20 patients waiting. Can you please come see them? So he'll like come up and get through them and be like, hey, this patient has this. What do you want to do? Do you want to operate? I'm like, sure, let me do a check real quick. So we have a weird relationship, but we know how to get through the patients and make people safe.
The greatest insult you can give to an ER doctor is to call them slow. So I just go see the patients quickly.
Yeah, wow. And you know, you mentioned that you have this malnutrition program for the kids. Can you tell me about that and how can that be supported?
Well, in general, part of the issue with what the West has done in Africa is putting a Band-Aid on stuff, kind of fixing the immediate need, but the whole give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. So there is some money that comes in to feed malnourished children. And there's a lot of protocols, Doctors Without Borders, World Health Organization, everybody has their own protocols for these that we try to adapt. You know, treat their infections, make sure they're getting a right mix of kind of oil, sugar, milk powder or whatever formula. But then also we have their mothers come with the babies every week, and we teach them about what proper nutrition we can find around. You can find something called moringa, you can find wood sorrel, you can find the nutrition that's needed around where we have it. We can teach them about breastfeeding exclusively for the first 6 months of life to try to get those kids pudgy before they start getting malaria or whatever else, or giardia or whatever else is going to tap their strength and make them lose weight. So the nutrition center does feed kids, yes, but one of the big pushes is kind of public health awareness, nutrition awareness, so that the kids don't get malnourished in the first place, don't come back malnourished again once we stop feeding them. And along the lines of training people, so we are missionaries, so our goal is twofold, to tell people about God, because that's kind of part of our job, and we enjoy that, and also healing patients. But what we found is that foreigners who keep coming back to Africa isn't the solution for healthcare in Africa. The solution is to train Africans to become specialists. So our big goal is to find excellent African physicians and train them as either surgical specialists or as family practitioners. So that is kind of our big thrust, our big giant goal and vision project that we're leading to now with most of the development things that we're doing at the hospital.
We've already started a nursing school 3 years ago, and we just graduated our first class. And Olen's really good at organizing and planning, which sometimes grates me because I'm not a big planner. I'm more sporadic, like, let's see what we do here. And he's very good at planning, which helped a lot with the nursing school and also with this surgical training program that we want to start. But yeah, it's very exciting. We just graduated our first nursing school class, because nurses in Africa are having a nursing program that we know they're being trained well, is really helpful. And we know it'll change lives, because we can't always be there. And sometimes, we have to leave for a war or different things, but it's who we have to train that is going to stay there that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, we can't speak for all of Africa, but certainly in Chad, a lot of nursing schools have popped up as kind of moneymaker diploma mills. There's one nursing school that's excellent, but they're not making many nurses so we're trying to contribute the little that we can to try to make some excellent nurses in the country. Because most Chadians during the course of their life, they'll never see a physician. They're seeing nurses who are running health centers out in rural areas. So to have nurses that are well-trained running those health centers is really critical, because that's who's treating the majority of Chadians. Even in our hospital, if we have 60, 70 patients coming to the emergency department every day, we're not seeing them all. We're busy doing surgery, doing ultrasound, x-ray, anesthesia, rounding in all the hospitalized patients. So the nurses see the patients that come in to be consulted on, and then they get us. We train them as best as we can to come get us when there's a patient that they don't know what to do. But if it's straightforward malaria, straightforward giardia, straightforward whatever, the nurses handle most of that.
That is amazing. And how many nurses did you have in your first graduating class?
Ooh, our first class was big. How many were there?
35, I think.
35, maybe?
35, 36, yeah.
I think that's what it started with. I think it was less that finished. And, out of those, there was probably half of them were, I would trust to be very excellent nurses. And I mean, that's saying something. Most of them don't have high school degrees. And so you're trying to train them to be essentially nurse practitioners in 3 years without a high school degree. It's a challenge, but half of them were willing to work pretty hard and study and do what they had to do to learn, and then translate it into the hospital clinical side and prove to us that they could be good nurses.
Wow, that is really good. I think that number is spectacular,
We were happy with it. In successive classes, we've kind of gone a little bit smaller.
It was harder this
size.
last year because of COVID. So people didn't want to, we have an entrance exam that Olen actually made up too. We didn't have as many this last year.
But we don't have
we're okay with that.
We don't have a set number as to how many we'll take. We just take the ones that are good, that are going to be good nurses. You know, if you can't write French, if you can't read French, if you can't do math, we send folks off to go learn those skills better before they come back and reapply.
Yeah. Wow. So you do real things, surgeries, healthcare, nutrition, and then you have these big goals, sustainability, you know, when you're not there, or because you cannot, you know, be the physicians for the entire country of Chad, and you're the only physicians for your hospital, except, you know, the people that come in and help you, like Andrew and things like that. You have these goals, and I think that it is incredible. And I just want to know, what makes you feel alive?
Vacation. Actually, one of the things I want to talk about is physician wellness. A lot of times, even in America, you can get very burnt out and stressed. And so we had been there for 10 years and we were starting to feel like sometimes it just feels like a job, even though you're saving lives every day. So Olen, thankfully, is very family oriented. And actually, when we were back in med school, before we even dated, we're like, can two physicians even get married? Because they're just going to work. And
We learned the answer is no.
So anyways, we talked about, okay, we're not quite ready to quit yet. So let's take a sabbatical. And so we ended up scheduling 9 months off, and during like the worst year ever to do it in 2020, but it ended up being a very fulfilling year for us.
What do? We hiked the Appalachian Trail last year. It's 2,200 miles from Georgia to Maine. And we hiked it with our 4 kids. Our kids were 11, 8, 6, and 4. And the 4-year-old, in fact, is the youngest person to ever hike the entire Appalachian Trail on her own 2 feet. Kids have been carried, but no kid that age has ever actually hiked the whole thing. So we're really proud of her. We're really proud of the other kids who were able to keep her engaged and motivated and convince her that she was enjoying hiking. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. It definitely made us feel alive, very different. It felt like a completely different life from our life in Chad. Like, did that really happen? Did we really do that? Was that a past life? But yes, that made us feel very alive.
Yeah, we love hanging out with our family. We don't often get to do that in Chad. And also it was it was like a stress relief just to be able to hike in the woods. And that sounds crazy for some people, but because all the bugs and, you know, snakes and everything. But I don't know, just being out in nature was so fulfilling, and not having a nurse knocking at our door every night was very nice and really revived our minds.
Even after a few months, I would actually wake up at night thinking that there was a nurse knocking at the door of our hammock.
And then we woke up to just children instead.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I too really think that mental health and taking a break, because it allows you to keep doing something that you want to do. So I think it's good. And the fact that you could do it with your kids and your family. So I think it's amazing. And I thank you for sharing those memories. Incredible.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us talk.